The 2024 VGC season has just wrapped up with the conclusion of the Honolulu World Championships, and we could be entering what might be the last season of VGC on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So I thought this would be the perfect time to talk about what I think VGC needs to be great in Generation 10. Really, the idea behind this here is just to kind of get the conversation started, right? I think, Generation 9 was a great step in the right direction for VGC. And honestly, VGC blew up. These were the biggest tournaments we've, ever seen. And honestly, the popularity is, it feels like it's bigger than it ever has been. And while there is a lot of good, there is definitely a lot of bad. And that's kind of what I want to touch on today, basically give you guys my ideas of what I think VGC needs and what I would like to see Game Freak implement going forward. And also too, just to, as I said, open up the conversation to you guys. I want to see what other people think, VGC needs, and, maybe, this could be the start of something special. So the first thing I'm going to touch on here is something that I think is pretty simple, but I also think is very important to really getting VGC known by, the broader audience of Pokemon. Because really, when you think about the game, there are millions of people who play Pokemon. And realistically, there is not that many people who play VGC, right? And I think a big reason for that is because the game is primarily single battles. Now, I do think that, making the game all double battles, half double battles, or even just the option where there's just a lot more double battles than we're used to, I do think would be a step in the right direction, because I do think a lot of the more casual player base thinks of Pokemon as a single 1v1, 6v6, whatever you want to call it. And I do think that is a big reason why you see 6v6 singles on Smogon be a bit more popular than VGC. And it's also why I think, too, you look at YouTube, a lot of the big Pokemon, competitive battlers are people like Pokeaim, ThunderBlunder77, right? Even guys like Freezeye are coming up now as well, where I think people just in general are more interested in singles than doubles. And a big reason for that is because the games are primarily single battles. So I do think, having double battles, I think is a great way, one, to teach newer players about doubles, and learning, hey, there's a lot more technique to doubles than just, spamming Surf and Hyper Voice and, just praying, right? So that's kind of the first thing I think, doesn't really, I guess, it's not a VGC thing, it's more a Pokemon thing, but again, I think it would be very, very good for the series to actually, start really implementing double battles a lot more, like what we did in the DLC. Another big thing I do think is pretty important for, Pokemon in general to kind of start teaching the casual player base again, is explaining EVs and IVs in the game. Because I think unless you are someone like myself, or, you're someone who goes out and watches other YouTubers do their stuff, a lot of people don't realize that EVs and IVs are actually a thing. And, when I was thinking about, doing this topic, I was talking to some of my friends, and some of them were telling me, they got into Pokemon Sword and Shield is when they started playing, VGC. And, he thought, like, he didn't realize that EVs and IVs were necessarily a thing. He told me, he's like, I maxed out my speed on my Dragapult, but my Dragapult was getting outsped by all the other Dragapults, and he didn't realize why. And it was, partially because the EV trained wrong, the IVs weren't perfect, natures were off as well. So I do think, having something in the game that can teach players how to play VGC, or at least, the basics like EVs, IVs, natures, all that kind of stuff, is another really important direction the game needs to go in. The third thing here is something I am personally incredibly passionate about, and this is something I've spoken about quite a bit, and that is a spectator mode. Now, for me, it is honestly so disappointing that we don't have a spectator mode. And again, coming right off the World Championships, we saw the World's Finals was played on the spectator mode. Why the public doesn't have that, I'll never know. I think there are a lot of important reasons as to why the spectator mode would be fantastic. One, the ability to watch other players' games live on your Switch, I think is incredibly good, especially, again, for newer players, but also communities, right? We've recently had a big tour hosted by Himi. I think it was like, it was like 450 players at the start of Regulation H. He was streaming it to like 2,000 people on Twitch. And the reason he was able to, really get that amount of viewers is because a lot of the people playing in the tournament were streaming, right? That was the whole point of it. He said, hey, if you're playing in this tournament, you have the ability to stream, please stream so we have someone to watch. And I think, when it comes to grassroots level tournaments, I think having that spectator mode is so important, right? Because now it's like me, right? A big reason why I don't host tournaments is because, like, what do I get out of it, right? I can host a tournament, then if no one, participating in the tournament streaming, what can I do? I can't cast the games, I can't stream the games. There's not much I can do, right? So I'm just kind of sitting there, like, playing in my own tournament, which, some people do that, and that's great, right? Obviously, people need places to play in, but for me as a content creator and someone who wants to stream more, the ability to, like, host a tournament and say, hey, guys, here's my tournament, maybe we get 50 people playing the tournament, and then each round I can just pick, one of the games, say, hey, we're gonna stream this game, it'll be really good. And another big thing as well is, again, we're coming off the heels of the World Championships, right? I streamed, throughout the entire thing, and for the, for those 3 days over the World Championships, I was averaging, 200-ish viewers. And the amount of time someone came into my chat and said, how's Wolf going? Did Wolf win this round? And we're just sitting there refreshing Arcanine Labs waiting to see, like, did Wolf win? Did Wolf not win? It's kind of sad. And obviously I'm using Wolfie here as is the example, but again, it's much broader, right? You know, for example, I'm a fan of JUX9. I would have loved to have watched Joe's games at Worlds, but those games will never be seen by anyone besides Joe and the guy he played against. And again, to me, I think, you know, if this game is going to continue to grow as a spectator sport, as a competitive game, you really need to make that spectator mode better. And again, just the ability to, you know, follow people's runs at events, you know, like for example, my friend Luke, he played at Worlds. My friend Dim played at Worlds. I would have loved to have sat there and watched their games. Like, I want to see what my boys are doing. You know, we need things like the VS Seeker as well, so you can save replays. I really think a spectator mode is like one of the most important things we can have as a community because, again, it really means that we can host community events and people are actually interested. And yeah, look, I can sit here and ramble all day, but I truly think a spectator mode is the most important thing for Generation 10, at least in my opinion. Now, going back to, I think one of the bigger issues we had in Scarlet and Violet is the way the formats kind of played out. You know, we had Regulation A or Series A for 2 months, which was basically regional decks, no legends at all. And then Series B was like, hey, okay, we're doing that, plus we're doing the Paradox for another 2 months. And then it was like, okay, for the next 3 months, we're now adding in the Ruinous Quartet, which again, obviously, you know, the legendary Pokemon are very powerful. They warp the metagame. But then we just got this stupid home drop. And it was like, we just get Urshifu and the Genies dropped into the game like 6-7 months in. It was a brand new format like a week before Worlds. And honestly, I don't want to say it killed VGC because, you know, I had a lot of fun playing VGC the last, you know, year and a half, 2 years. But to me, it was one of the stupidest things they could have done. And because of that, I really want to see them ramp up the power level. I don't want to see them just do some stupid drop like they did, especially right now. You know, we're basically about to go into Regulation H as this, you know, video is going up, or at least at the time I'm recording it, right? Where technically the format was announced 3 weeks ago, right? And there is a lot of, you know, a lot of support around this. Like, everyone's so excited. Like, I can tell you right now, as someone who makes YouTube videos, this is the most growth I've ever seen. And it's not even close. People are so excited for Regulation H because ever since Regulation D, it's just, you know, we got Urshi, we got the Genies, then we went into like single restricted. We also got, you know, some pretty broken Paradox Pokemon introduced, like obviously Raging Bolt. So what I would really like to see them do is like, one, give us a year with just like the Nat decks, right? I'm a fan of how they did it with the Paradox Mons and the Ruinous Quartet. Obviously they were very powerful Pokemon, but, you know, if they balance the you know, the Nat decks right, I definitely think, you know, we can go into it. You know, we can have, you know, say 4 months, for example. That's another thing as well. The 3 month and 4 month formats, I do think are really important. I personally prefer 3 months, but if you want to say 4 months is better, that's also fine. But, you know, give us, say, like 3 months where, hey, it's the Nat decks, no legends, right? And then, you know, maybe, again, we get something equal to the Paradox Pokemon coming in for another 3 months. And then our World Championships would then be played like, hey, we're 9 months into the game. And we're going to play on just the complete Nat decks, you know, sorry, the complete, you know, regional decks, barring, say, you know, the restricted legendaries, right? And then I think that would give you 9 months where you can ramp up, you have something really fun. That then leads into like DLC 1 and 2, where you play that for the next 6 months, right? And then after you do those, that's when you can say, hey, maybe now we do a home update, right? Obviously, in Scarlet and Violet right now, we don't have things like the Tarpus, we don't have the Ultra Beast, we don't have the XY Legends. So I really feel like, you know, you could do something where you play those, you know, first 3 formats, then you go into the DLC, and then you say, hey, okay, we're like a year and a half into this game. Now let's add a bit more power in, right? This is where we say maybe we add the Urshis, the Genies, and then that kind of leads you into Worlds number 2. And then after Worlds number 2, that's when you can say, okay, we've had 2 World Championships on this game now. Now we can start talking about restricted. We can talk about the single restricted format, double restricted, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, because again, to me, it's not that they ruined the Scarlet and Violet season, but I do definitely think just dropping Urshifu Tornadus in when they did, and obviously the other Pokemon that came with it, you know, Pokemon like Incineroar obviously came back. Sorry, not Incineroar, Rillaboom came back really early. But yeah, I do think, you know, dropping them in when they did really killed the vibe, I would say, for VGC, and made people a bit less interested, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know, we're 6-7 months into this game and now we have the stupid broken Pokemon from last game. And I guess just an extension on that, talking about the months, I think a 2-month format is way too low. I think minimum you want 3 months, probably maximum 4 though. I think shorter formats are better for a more casual audience. Obviously, as competitors, you know, a lot of people say, hey, I want like a 6-month format so we can really figure things out. But I do think, you know, to keep things fresh, keep things flowing, keep people engaged with the game, a 3 to 4 month format is definitely the way to go. And obviously, that's how we've been going in the future, in the recent, recent formats. Now, another pretty important thing for me as a competitor are the ways in which we earn CP, right? So I'm in Australia. Australia typically has 3 regional events every year. Then we also have, you know, things like our locals, of course, and then we also have access to the global challenges. But right now, I do think one of the biggest issues VGC faces is Wallet Warriors. Now, Obviously, I'm not having a go at anyone who pays to travel and play Pokemon. I think if you can, travel to America, Europe, and all that stuff and play Pokemon, good on you, man. Like, honestly, take the experience. That's unreal, right? I'm glad people get to play the game they love and they get to travel the world doing it. But also at the same time, for people who can't necessarily travel and spend all this money, it is definitely a lot harder for them to qualify for Worlds. And because of that, I do think having, one, maybe a bit of a restriction on the amount of, regionals you can get to, especially international championships. I really think you should be locked to your best performance at one IC. I think people who can go to every IC clearly just have a inherently broken advantage where you don't even have to be the best player. All you have to do is show up to these international championships, have, relatively average results, and you're gonna rake in points. But again, I also think, having different ways to earn CP online would be great. I think, having things like the Players Cup come back would be really good. I think having more GCs, the Global Challenges would also be really good. Really just ways to earn more CP, I think, in online, in like an online format is very important. So the next one here is accessibility. Now, again, there are a lot of issues I had with Scarlet and Violet in terms of the way in which Pokemon were available to us. Now, for me personally, it doesn't matter because, I'm an adult. I've played these games since I was a kid. I own every game. I've beaten every game. When I get a new game, I 100% the decks, right? I 100% of the decks in Scarlet. I didn't Sword and Shield. I didn't, Sun and Moon. I have all the Pokemon. I'm not the people I'm worried about, though. The people I'm worried about are the, the young kids whose parents aren't going to buy them every game. The people who can't even afford to buy every game. The people who are getting into VGC today and say, hey, I want to play Regulation G, and it's like, oh, you want to play Reg G? Well, guess what? You actually can't get Calyrex in Scarlet and Violet. Oh, you want Urshifu? Well, if you were playing before the DLC dropped, you better have had Sword and Shield. You better have also had the DLC. It's like, oh, the genies? You want the genies? Guess what? Tornadus is still not catchable inside Scarlet and Violet. You'd want to hope you have either Sword and Shield or, Pokemon Legends Arceus. And yeah, accessibility to me is incredibly important. Do not add a Pokemon into the, playable pool if you can't catch it in the game, Right now, we can't catch Xerneas, Yveltal, and Zygarde in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Fantastic. Leave them out of Regulation G. A lot of other Pokemon we can't catch. I can't catch a Zacian in my Scarlet and Violet, but it's legal, right? Obviously, it's not one of the best Pokemon right now, but the two best Pokemon in the game right now are Calyrex Ice Rider and Calyrex Shadow Rider. Guess what? I mean, you can catch, Glastrier and Spectator, but you can't catch the Cali, therefore you need to have either Sword or Shield. And to me, that is just, it's really bad. If you're going to add Pokemon into the game, make them catchable. If they're not catchable, do not make them legal in VGC. Absolutely just, there's nothing, I hate it. I hate it, right? Accessibility to me is very, very important, right? And again, the Calis are a perfect example. It's like, oh, you want to use Calyrex? Well, you need to buy Sword and Shield, and you better buy the DLC, and then, of course, you're also going to have to beat it all. I think it's just incredibly bad for, players who are new to the game, even people who just can't necessarily afford to buy it, right? It's just bad. So the next thing on my list here is something that, in my opinion, is pretty simple. This is just nerfs, buffs, balancing. Obviously, I can throw some, examples out there, right? The Calyraxes are both pretty damn broken. Miraidon also appears to be pretty broken. In the, the non-restricted formats, Urshifu needs a nerf. I don't know if the answer is you nerf, Surging Strikes or Wicked Blow. I don't know if the answer... I mean, I do know the answer. It's you nerf Unseen Fist. But yeah, these Pokemon need nerfs. Again, there are plenty of other Pokemon that also need nerfs, and there are plenty of Pokemon that need buffs. Like, there are so many Pokemon that are unusable in VGC because of their stats, their move pool, all that kind of stuff, right? My favorite Pokemon is Sceptile, right? Sceptile is a special attacker that has a absolute dog shit move pool. You're running Focus Blast, a Grass move, and a Dragon move, and that is it. And that's why people are playing Sceptile as a support, right? And again, there are literally hundreds of mons I could talk about, and I'm not saying every mon should be viable in every format. Don't get me wrong, right? Of course, a mon with, 500 base stats is not really going to be as good as a mon with 600 base stats, right? The pseudo legends are pretty damn good, and I mean, right now in Regulation H, we're seeing that. Like, Pokemon like Archaludon just straight up stat check other Pokemon because it just has so many more stats than they do. But yeah, realistically, I think some nerfs, some buffs, the Pokemon that are a little overtuned, the Urshis, maybe even the Genies could get a little bit of a tweak, even like things like Fluttermane could get, maybe a little bit of a nerf. And then, of course, those weaker Pokemon, like, again, my goat Sceptile, maybe give them a little something, right? Maybe, change some stats, make it a little faster, make it hit a little harder, give it a move it didn't have before, that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's a whole different can of worms. I could literally make, 50 videos about buffing and nerfing Pokemon. So yeah. So next one on my list here is the rusted bottle caps. Now, again, this probably comes a little bit under accessibility, but I was more kind of focusing on the Pokemon in that regard. But yeah, right now, EV training in the games are, as easy as they've ever been. You can literally EV train your Pokemon with money, and if you play the game, you've got a lot of freaking money. One of the biggest issues I have right now is the inability to get, mons easily that need specific IVs. For example, right, I want to use a Calyrex Ice Rider, Shadow Rider. Ideally, I want zero attack because right now, one of the best ways to deal with it are things like Foul Play, right? It hits you for 4x damage. But then I got to sit there and reset over and over and over again for Calyrex. Really freaking annoying. Just add the Rusted Bottle Cap. Also, we have the feathers, right? Which is, very important because, you can use a feather that gives you +1 to a certain stat, right? Why don't we do that, like as well with IVs, right? That way you say, hey, I really need like a 27 speed Amoonguss, right? Okay, I can get a perfect speed Amoonguss. It has 31. Maybe I use like 4 feathers or something on it to drop its, speed IV by 4. Obviously, it's a bit different. The feathers do EVs, but, something that can just like, lower a stat by, 1, raise it by 1, and then also just throw in the Rusted Bottle Cap as well, I think is very, very important. Again, it just makes things easier. It means you don't have to spend 10 hours hunting for a Blood Moon Ursaluna with 0 attack and 0 speed. So the final 2 things here on my list, the first one is, like, it seems so small, but at the same time, I think it would be so freaking good. And that is giving Japan and basically the rest of Asia a proper circuit. Right now, the Japanese circuit, the Southeast Asian circuit, the Korean circuit is awful. It's like a best of 1 closed team sheet, like, and it's, man, it's like, it's so freaking bad, man. And look, I get it, right? I hear stories about, like if Japan held a regional, it would like be way too big, blah, blah, blah. But as a fan, as as someone who loves the game, you can't tell me watching a Japanese regional would not be the hypest shit you've ever seen, man. Like if I got to, sit here in Australia, like Asia is like the only country with a good time zone for me. Like again, the Worlds, thank God it was in Hawaii because we're like 20 hours apart. So I could actually stream Worlds. But like if I could sit at home, stream like a Japanese regional, international, all that kind of shit, man, that would be unbelievable. But also, as someone who's not that far from Japan, I'd love to fucking get on a plane and go over to Japan and play a regional. Like I got all these people like, they go in like to like different countries and shit to play regionals. Man, I'd love to go to Japan, play in that. I'd also love to watch it. I think it would be unreal. And the same goes for the rest of Asia, right? I know people in Southeast Asia that, again, they're playing like best of 1 closed team sheet for a one-time event trying to get to the World Championships. And yeah, it's pretty freaking bad. And to round us out here, this is more of a fun one. I don't necessarily think VGC needs this to be bad, but for me, as a fan, as a fan of the mechanic as well, I would love to see Megas return. Now, again, I said at the start of the video, this could be the last year of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Doesn't mean we're necessarily getting Gen 10 next. It could mean, potentially, Pokemon's Legend ZA will take over, will take over VGC for maybe a year or 2. And if that's the case, I would love to see Megas return. And again, this is me being biased. Sceptile is like my favorite Pokemon in the game. I think Sceptile paired up with Chi-Yu, which is like my other favorite Pokemon in the game. And Miraidon could be a really cool combo. Lightning Rod next to Discharge. You also have Dragon Cheer. Come on, we got some sauce there. Of course, Chi-Yu and my guy Sceptile. There's a bit of damage buff there. And then of course as well, like, other Pokemon. I'm a huge fan of Salamence. Like Mega Salamence on that team also seems kind of cool. But yeah, I just think Megas are super cool. I think again, people love Megas, and I think if you're gonna put Megas in the game, you need a way to battle with them. And yeah, to me, it'd be so damn cool, man, to just like have Megas back in the game. I think it'd be really sick. But yeah, anyways, that's it, I guess. As I said, this for me was more of a, like, I wanted to start a discussion, right? Because again, we could be, for all I know, potentially 1 year away from what could be our next, next game for VGC. I don't know. We could be 2 years away. Who knows? We could be on Scarlet and Violet for the next 2 years. And as much as I pray that isn't the case, because I don't know what else they could do with the format, you never know, right? Game Freak, TPCI, they're kind of crazy. But yeah, again, I open this up to you guys. If you guys have any suggestions for what you think VGC needs to be great, please let me know down below in the description. As I said, this for me is, I want to start the discussion. I want people to kind of, talk about it, and I want to see what everyone has to say. Because again, I'm one man, and I can come up with a bunch of things, but at the end of the day, when we all think together, we're gonna get more ideas. Yeah. Anyway, guys, if you've made it to the end of the video, appreciate you. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.